Good afternoon, everyone. Well, at least here in Michigan. So I'm Megan Cole. I'm at the Travel and Tourism Research Association, or as we lovingly call TTRA. We are so pleased to introduce Brian Screptock, Vice President of Client Engagement at Longwoods International, as well as Kelsey Waite, Senior Director of Client Engagement from Longwoods International, who are joining us today as they discuss Longwoods' annual domestic traveler update. We hope you all enjoy today's webinar. If you have any questions, please feel to drop them in the chat or the Q&A feature. And we are excited to learn from you, Brian and Kelsey.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And good afternoon, everyone who's watching from your office or from home. Thank you for joining us today. We are so excited that you chose to spend some time this afternoon with us to walk through some sneak peeks from 2025 from our visitor profile study, Travel USA. We also, before we get in, want to thank TTRA for their years of partnership. We very much appreciate today's opportunity and always appreciate working with TTRA. As I noted, today we're really just going to be reviewing some of those key highlights from 2025 from our Travel USA study. There will be some new data points that we will point out to you, and we'll also talk about at the very end sort of what's next from a Longwoods perspective. So without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about Longwoods. So, for those of us who don't know who Longwoods is, which most of us do, we have been around. We were established in 1978 and quickly became a leader in travel and tourism research. We were founded in Toronto, Ontario, yes, Canada, and today our US headquarters is in Columbus, Ohio. In addition to the visitor profile data that we're going to be reviewing on today's presentation, Longwoods also offers a variety of services and products, but some primary ones that I want to put out there. We do offer an ROI, or return on investment, of your ad campaign, so ROI measurement. We also offer something called a brand health assessment when you're trying to understand better how your brand is resonating with the target audiences you seek. And then we also provide what are called resident sentiment studies. I know most of you are very familiar with the work we do in partnership with Destinations International. All right, one more teaser slide. So before we dig into the actual results from 2025, I want to talk a little bit about Travel USA and give you a few reminders of what we're going to see today. So we know Travel USA is our most well-known product, so I'm not going to do too much into the weeds on any of this. If you have any methodology questions, feel free to save those to the end, or feel free to reach out to Kelsey and I directly. We're always happy to talk about our methodology here at Longwoods. So a little bit about Travel USA. Travel USA is the largest and longest running domestic visitor profile study. Annually, we are collecting data on approximately 250,000 US trips. Now, it's important for me to note and highlight here, today we're only going to be looking at overnight data. No day. There is no data, no day data. Oh, that was a mouthful, Kels. No day data in today's presentation. We do define the difference between an overnight and a day trip. So, for the purpose of today, I do want you to know an overnight trip is any journey for business or pleasure outside of your community and not part of your normal routine where you spend one or more nights away from home. That is the actual definitions that our respondents are going to see as they take this survey. It's also important for me to note that for analysis, we do weight our data on key demographics by using the US Census. Yes, we have to update this every 10 years, and when there's adjustments made, we have to make adjustments based on what the government is publicly publishing. That said, the reason why we do this is because it is extremely important to us when we're delivering these results and providing this data that it is representative of and projectable to the population. Therefore, highly accurate and highly reliable information we're about to look through. Now, the last note here, keep in mind, just like last year, our Q4 data from 2025 is in its final stages of being analyzed, cleaned, and prepared for report deliveries that are going to start next month. So we're really excited, but just like last year, this sneak peek is only Q1 and Q2 data from 2025. Any comparisons that we include will only be from Q1 and Q2 combined from any given year. So, Here we go, folks. Yay! Let's start with pre trip and let's take a look at information sources and booking sources. So, we did change some things in 2025, and you'll notice in the upper left of the slide, I'm putting new data. You will see that called out on any slide where we see some new data. I do wish I had a glass of Prosecco. At any rate, so what did we change? Well, we wanted to make sure that our source tracking information sources, booking sources, became much more comprehensive for our current subscribers and clients, right? So we did a little bit of an overhaul. Let me walk you through that first. First, we are now aggregating and reporting by medium. And this means essentially you're going to get in the reporting for any of our subscribers, those who used online slash digital, in person, social media, etc., those types of mediums. So information sources by medium will now be reported, similar to how we aggregate in some of our other reporting and products that we offer. We're also getting a little more granular and asking respondents about booking sources, specifically for accommodations, transportation, attractions, and restaurants. So, what did we learn from the first half of 2025? Well, we know that there's some technology driven planning occurring and something we need to keep an eye on. First off, 61% of domestic travelers are using online slash digital information sources for their trip planning. However, we also have 44% who are using in person sources. So, again, never discount that word of mouth, right? We know VFR is a very important segment for many of our destinations, but this just sort of reinforces that word of mouth is so important when you're out there marketing, right? So, when we dig beyond medium and we get granular into those actual sources or variables that they can choose from, this is where it comes back. Advice for friends and family is at 22%, the top info source used for trip planning across the US. Number two was hotel slash resort at 21%. And number three, no surprise, Facebook at 19%. So you can see, right, that Facebook creeping up there in that 19%. We are moving digital, and that's only going to continue as time goes on, but never discount that word of mouth in that VFR segment for the value they bring as far as trip planning goes. Now, Longwoods also knows nobody in this industry can present without talking about artificial intelligence. So, of course, I can't disappoint you, right? We are seeing very slow but steady growth over time. And here are some of those highlights that are included on this slide. We know that 9% of travelers are using AI and voice activated search for booking accommodations. We also know that 8% of travelers are using AI for booking transportation. And what is our main takeaway from this slide? Well, first, yes, I mean, it's cheers. But takeaway AI adoption is still emerging, but it is now present across the entire booking funnel. So we want to watch for this growth and sort of how this evolves over time. Thankfully, we did a nice overhaul in this section, so we will be able to provide very, very impactful insights for you all. Next up, we're staying with that trip planning pre trip, but we also want to talk about, well, how long did they stay away from their homes? So, that said, let's start with trip planning timeline. We know that about half or 49% plan 2 months or less in advance in the first 2 quarters of 2025. We know that 15% plan 6 to 12 months ahead. But there is something interesting happening in 2025. And that is that spontaneity is decreasing. In fact, those who selected I did not plan anything in advance dropped from 14% down to 11%. So 3 points year over year, but it's actually down 5 points versus 2022. So as Kelsey and I walked through and talked about much of this data in the past few weeks, is this another indicator of that K-shaped economy that I know everyone heard about and talked about many times at MOF this year? If spontaneity is dropping, this is probably a bit of a concern for those budget travelers, right, who tend to do more of that, probably scaling back on some of that spontaneity. So, certainly for the first time in at least the last 4 years, we're seeing that did not plan anything in advance drop significantly. Last thing on this slide is going to be those average total nights away. Now, as anyone who knows our report or data well, this is total nights away on their trip, right? So, in your report for your specific destination, we are going to tell you their average length of stay. So, of those total nights, how much did they actually stay in your destination? From a national perspective, obviously, we really can't do that. But what we're providing here is that we know 3.7 nights is the average total nights away on any given overnight trip in the US that is occurring in the first half of 2025. This is consistent and directly in line with what we saw in 2024. Next up, where did they go? Well, we do have our top 5 states that were visited in the first half of 2025. Probably no major surprises for most of you on this call. There is a close tie for first place, and that's going to be Florida and California, both coming in at 12%. We've got Texas and New York vying and tying for that second place, both coming in at 7%. And then rounding out our top 5 is going to be Arizona at 4%. Well, we know where they went. How about how did they get there, Brian? Well, let me answer that question for you. Let's start at the very top here for transportation that was used to get to the destination. Interestingly, own car slash truck is at 63%, and this is actually down 3 points from 2024 when we saw this at 66%. We've seen plane at 28%, or about 3 in 10 are now using a plane. And rental car, which is not charted here, is at 15% in 2025, or the first half of 2025. Just below that, we're looking at what type of vehicle did you use on your trip? Well, we know that gasoline is coming in at 73%, and this is down from 76% in 2024, so down 3 points year over year. But let's look back to 2023. This number was 81%. So, gasoline, there is a trend away from gasoline vehicles, and we want you to take note because we want your destinations to be ready. There is further proof here that I have not charted on the slide, but I want to walk you through it. We know that hybrid vehicles came in at 12%. For the type of vehicle used on their trips. This is up 3 points versus 2023. Electric vehicles came in at 11%, and that's up 4 points versus 2023. And then, of course, plug in hybrids. This came in at 7 points, but it's also up 3 points from 2023. So, again, that 3 point is just on our margin of error cusp. Certainly, electric is outside of that, so it is certainly considered significant. But in short, we're just seeing a continued shift toward electric and hybrid vehicles for travel that we do not see slowing down anytime soon. Now, obviously, it's been a very slow start, so we will continue to keep an eye on this as time progresses. Um, I also want to note before I leave this slide, it is not charted here, but we did add in for transportation used during the trip or within that destination, we added in an additional option, and it is simply e-bikes slash scooters. So just note that when you get your report, you will have access to this data as soon as we start unleashing that. More to come on that later. Now, why did they go on their trips, right? Why? We've answered the where, the who, the what. Now we want to know. Now we just want to know why. So Longwoods has been asking this main purpose of trip, if I can use my words, main purpose of trip question the exact same since 1990. So this one question, you guys, unchanged since 1990. That's a very long time. Let me walk you through it first. So, first let me explain how we define leisure trips. Longwoods defines leisure as marketable plus VFR, which are those first two you see here in the middle and left of the slides. Well, what's a marketable trip, Brian? I'll tell you. So, these are simply specific trip types that you can apply to your strategic messaging. And some of them that they're allowed to choose from out of the 15 total in our main purpose of trip options are going to be things like touring, special event, resort, casino, city trip. Of course, if you ever want the full list, happy to provide. But we separate these out from VFR because Longwoods knows, after literally decades of doing this research, that marketable travelers tend to spend more and stay longer versus VFR, and therefore typically have a higher economic impact value when visiting your destination. Then what we do, we bucket all 15 of those main purposes of trip into four main areas. That's going to be marketable, VFR, business, and business leisure, which is not charted on this slide. But for the sake of this slide, let's talk about what's in front of us. We saw 53% marketable trips in the first half of 2025. This is actually up 4 points year over year when looking back to 2024. We also know that VFR, visiting friends and relatives, came in at 37% nationally for the first half of 25. This is down 4 points year over year. And business has held steady at that 7% year over year. In short, we know that VFR is a vital segment for many destinations, and we will see if the shift we're seeing nationally in the first half of 2025 is going to continue to hold into 2026. Now, I'm going to say something pretty cool because it has to do with my next slide, and I'm super excited, you guys. Remember how I said we haven't changed this question since 1990? Well, Longwoods finally in 2025 decided to make one single change to the main purpose of trip question. And now, anyone who's asking or who's selecting, any of our respondents selecting that they're visiting friends and relatives, we now have a follow up question for them. And we're asking them, were you visiting with friends and family that live in that destination? Or did you meet up in the destination with friends and family who live elsewhere? So we wanted to get a little bit more granular and find out some more information, which I have on my next slide if my button works. Dun, 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 dun. Thank you, Kelsey. I saw you this in a drum roll. I appreciate it. All right. So we're still talking about the part of the why, right? However, we're just getting a little bit more granular. And it's probably not a shock for most of us from a national level that 9 out of 10 VFR travelers were visiting their friends and relatives that live in the destination that was visited, right? Not a major shocker. However, even from a national scale, Longwoods is very much looking forward to digging in to how and what that 10% of VFR that met up in the destination with friends and relatives who live elsewhere and sort of what they were up to. And what we also know is this is really going to start to vary on a destination level because we do have some destinations. Their VFR segment is over 50%, right? So we know that we're going to get some different information and it's going to be super fun for our subscribers and us to be digging into those that are meeting up in the destination with friends and relatives who live elsewhere. So lots of exciting stuff in our 2025 report. Now, this is also new, and I'm so excited because this is something I think we've all wanted. So I hope you're all just beaming ear to ear, or maybe you're just soaking up some of my excitement. But this is my new favorite piece of info that our subscribers will soon be able to access here: traveler typologies. So the way that this question is initially written in our survey, please select the option that best describes the type of traveler that you are. It's important to note, respondents can only pick one of these. There are 13 total in the list, and each type comes with its own definition in the survey for those respondents. Now, on the slide in front of us, I'm only giving you the top 5 because I don't want to give it all away. I want you to be interested and I want you to come to me and ask for more of that information, right? So, in the first half of 2025, what were our top 5 traveler typologies? I want to also note before I go through this, we did work with some industry ad agencies to come up with this list of 13. So it wasn't just a Longwoods idea. We did use our partners and we relied on them to come up with things that would be very actionable and insightful for all the work that you do. But the top 5, let's start off. Budget friendly travelers coming in at almost a quarter, 23%. These folks are prioritizing affordability and value. Number 2, family travelers coming in at 16%. Obviously, they're going to look for activities suitable for children, right? Number 3, outdoor/adventure seekers coming in at 13%. Now we know what this is around: outdoor activities and thrills, right? Number 4, cultural/history seekers. I meant heritage in the middle there, so let me reread that. Cultural heritage history seekers is coming in at 11%, and we know that they're going to be most interested in those local cultures and historical sites that your destinations have to offer. And number 5, luxury travelers. 10% of Americans in the first half of 2025 who took our survey are looking for those high end experiences and personalized services. Now, something Kelsey, also brought up here is this another indicator of that K shaped economy? Number one, almost a quarter are saying budget friendly travelers, but then we're seeing another 10% also reaching in the top five saying that they best identify with luxury travelers, right? So these are another indicators. We are not economists, but certainly the data that is coming through in our survey is really lining up with major other sources in the industry and what they are seeing as well. All right. So, some new data here, but really it's just sort of a refreshment on how we set up our accommodation section. I don't want anyone to get too nervous about this because I know that we made updates to accommodations in 2020, and I believe more updates were made in 23, and now we've updated in 2025. From Longwoods, please know we promise this is it. No more changes are going to be made on this, but we really needed to refine this because it was such a strong request from the majority of our subscribers. So let me talk about those changes. We did add in, again, this is just for accommodations. We added in hotel slash motel as a combined variable and short term rental parentheses Airbnb verbo. What we removed from the study, or from the question, I should say, rented home slash condo slash apartment, timeshare, country inn slash lodge, hotel, motel are listed separately. So we've removed that from the 2024 and changed what it looked like in 2025. Um, we also removed rented cottage slash cabin. Instead, what we're doing is those that are selecting the new variable, red, short term rental, Airbnb and Verbo, are provided the following follow-up question, and it's done separately, and it's also reported separately in our reporting. And for anyone who selected short-term rental, they are allowed to select from the following list: home, apartment slash condo, cottage slash cabin, and other. So those are the four new selections that we are giving for short-term rentals in 2025. Very happy about this. So thank you to my entire team for all the work that went into this. But let's talk about the data in front of the slide now that I've walked you through what's changed. So what we know about accommodations in the first half of 2025. Well, our new hotel slash motel newly combined, is coming in at 51%, so a little over half of the travelers we spoke to in the first half of 2025 are going to be staying in a hotel slash motel. We also saw home of friends and relatives. This is an unchanged variable at 24%. This is actually up 4 points year over year, right? So keep that in mind for what I'm about to say next. Resort hotel at 15%. This is up 5 points year over year. Now, is this another indicator of that K shaped economy? We're seeing homes of friends and relatives as an accommodation increase by 4 points, those budget friendly travelers, and then those resort hotel, certainly more luxury, up 5 points year over year. So, just another indicator of how things are shifting in this K shaped travel economy. Now, we also have short-term rentals. You can see it there listed at 10%. What is not listed on here, but I like to throw it in there, campground slash RV at 7% from a national perspective in the first half of 2025. Yeah, I hope all of my outdoor destinations are just loving that. The last thing I'm going to point out is what is new, because we've separated out those types of short-term rentals, and I'm giving you the top three here. So if you selected short-term rental in the accommodations question and you're getting this follow-up question, we know that over almost 60%, 56% are saying they stayed in a rented home or a short-term rental home. We've got a 44% who are saying their short-term rental was an apartment or a condo. And then we've got 21% staying in a short-term rental saying it's a cottage or a cabin. So that'll help us a little better understand what sort of products within the short-term rental categories are being most sought out from our travelers. And this is my favorite slide, but it's mostly because Kelsey and I, prior to this, made sure to set up a play date for all of our animals so that they could get to know each other before we had this presentation. I'm just kidding. Actually, Kelsey just sent me a sticker of her cat and I overlaid it on the photo with my dogs. Reality, I don't think anyone would get along, but I do want to tell you who they are on the right. So before we get into the data, this is Marnie on the left here. This is Lucy on the right. And then joining the party from the floor is Mr. Carl, Kelsey's cat. So we love them. This slide just makes me really happy, but there's another reason why it makes me happy. This is new data for 2025, you guys. Nearly 1 in 5 trip, at least in that first half of 2025, includes pets. So we know that this is an important consideration for accommodations and attractions. What is not on this slide is a crosstab that we ran on the back end of this. We also know that these travelers are going to be staying in the following places. 51% of those traveling with pets are staying at a hotel slash motel. 21% are staying at a resort hotel, and 19% are staying at the homes of friends and relatives. So, again, lots of data to dig into on this, but certainly something we want to make sure we're being able to keep an eye on, sort of as that niche travel, and we start to see more of these as time goes on. And yes, I don't know about Carl, but Lucy and Marnie are coming with me on the majority of my trips, and I do not mind paying that extra $75 a night. It is so worth it to wake up with my puppies in my bed in another destination. All right, so now we're looking at activities here. We do have some new things I want to talk through, but let's just start off with that top three. So, top three, no surprise, a quarter of Americans are going shopping on their overnight trips. We also know that about 20% or 2 in 10 are going on sightseeing activities and experiences. And then, of course, this wouldn't be America, right? Bar slash nightclub coming in at number three at 16%. We did add some activities to the tracking, and I want to walk you through those. So the first one, agritourism coming in at 3%, picnicking 7%, film tourism coming at 7%. We've got wellness activities coming in at 5%, regional and faith based activities coming in at 5% as well, astrotourism coming in at 3%, and pickleball coming in at 2%. I know there's pickleball lovers on this call. I'm sorry, it's only 2%. Do better. You've got to get the word out, right? If we want to see pickleball surpass shopping, it's going to take some work, people. All right. So it's also important to me to note something that's not on this slide. But for the US norm, we saw attending a celebration last year was down 4 points compared to the first half of 2024. It's really the lowest we've seen this in years. It will be interesting to see if this trend continues in 2026 or if this will increase again with all the big events that we're expecting in 2026, like the anniversary of Route 66 and America 250. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand this over to Kelsey, who's going to knock your socks off with everything she has to talk about.
I don't know about knocking the socks off, but I will do my best. But thank you, Brian. Thank you, TTRA. Thank you, everyone who's on the call. So happy to be with you all today. This next section, I know Brian has some really, really great information, but you're probably like, well, what about closer to my home? I love these US trends, but what about me here in the Midwest? I'm in Indianapolis, so I say that. So we're going to look at the 4 US regions based on the US Census. So we've got the West, Midwest, Northeast, and South. So we've got this big table, but don't worry, I will explain it as we go through. So like Brian had said, VFR has been down year over year, at least for the first half for the US norm, and we're seeing that is the case across all 4 regions as well. But it's still at least a third of all visitation to all 4 regions. So don't worry, it's still a major player, just a little bit more of a shift into that marketable, which, like Brian said, always good news too, because they spend more, stay longer. When we're talking about VFR specifically as a main purpose of trip, the Midwest is the winner with 41%, and that's almost 10 points higher than the West. Marketable is up 4 points or more year over year in all 4 regions for the first half of 2025, with the highest region being the West at 58%. This is really, really big and 5 points higher or more than the other 3 regions. We also found it interesting that business travel is even and steady across the country at 7%. And then the most visited state for each region was New York in the Northeast, Illinois in the Midwest, Florida in the South, and California in the West. And just fun note here, sorry Texas, but in every region except for the South, it's actually the most visited state equals the most populated state, except for Florida and Texas there in the South. Don't worry. People are still staying in traditional accommodations across the board. I know Brian had mentioned there was an uptick in those staying with friends and relatives. Don't worry, we're still seeing them in paid accommodations as well. And this is the case in all four regions, with over 50% staying in traditional paid accommodations. And the leader being the Northeast at 55% for hotels and motels. Homes of friends and relatives as an accommodation type did increase across the board for all four regions as well. So it wasn't one region heavily skewing it, it did increase across the board. Um, Even though that VFR segment did decrease. So again, so less people visiting friends and relatives, but of that group, more staying with their friends and relatives than they had in the past. Um, could be a trend to watch in 2026 as costs only continue to rise. And like Brian mentioned, that K shaped economy, right? And not surprising, based on the main purpose of trip by region, the Midwest is going to be the leader in VFR for accommodation type here as well. And then to go with that K-shaped economy, there are still over 1 in 10 travelers in the first half of the year that stayed at a resort hotel across all four regions. The region with the highest share of resort stayers, resort goers, was going to be in the West with nearly 1 in 5 staying at a resort property. More travelers to the Midwest. Shock, I know, with the great expanse. But more travelers to the Midwest use their own vehicle to reach their destination than any other region. At 72%, that was 14 points higher than those who use their own vehicle in the West to get to their destination. So, very different there by region. On the flip side, the West is going to be the highest for those who use a plane to get to their final destination at 35%. And second on the list is going to be Northeast at 29%. So, just taking one quick step back. So, something to think about for those in the West and the Northeast is promoting that Route 66, right? That 100-year anniversary. Great, they're flying here, but how are they going to explore Route 66 without a vehicle? So, starting to think of ways to partner with rental car agencies or tour operators once they arrive in the destination. So, like Brian mentioned, we did see shopping at number one for activities participated, and whew, no surprise, it was that way across all four regions too. So, we didn't want to give you repeat data. I know, wow, such travel, much awesome. Yeah, we didn't want to give you the same thing over and over. So, instead of showing you that shopping number by region, which I do want to just give a little asterisk, I was really surprised and happily so that around half of those who shopped actually shopped at locally owned businesses. So I think that's something that we're really excited to see and that keeps growing year over year. But again, instead of talking about shopping, let's look at the other top activities by region. And spoiler alert, sightseeing is number two in all four regions after shopping. But in the Northeast, for the top three, we have sightseeing, bars and nightclubs, and museums. In the Midwest, it's sightseeing, bars and nightclubs again, but then we have attending celebrations. So I see you college graduations. I mean, again, the first half of the year, that's going to be one of those major things in the Midwest. In the South, the top three are sightseeing, swimming, and beach and waterfront. So, definitely a big spring break region, and swimming does tend to even out a little bit more when we're looking at a full year versus just the first half of the year. And then for the West, the top three activities after shopping were, hello, surprise, sightseeing, casinos, thank you, Nevada, and then landmark historic sites.
So I just want to note we all need to make sure to keep an eye out for shifts this year, especially in things like museums, historical landmarks, and sporting events, as all four regions have big celebrations planned for America 250. Some of the westerly regions have the Route 66, but then three of the regions we've got the South, the West, and the Northeast. All of those have three or more FIFA host cities this year in June. So, something to keep an eye on for next year. Next, we'll take a deeper dive into the differences between how different generations travel. We'll look at the four main traveler groupings of generations, so Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, and Boomers. So, just like we saw with the US norm and regions, VFR has declined across all four generations we're looking at today as well. The biggest year over year declines, aka 4 points each, were in the Gen Z and Gen X groups. For all four generations, marketable is the top main purpose of trip for the first half of the year. So, another trend that we continue to see across the board. And then, of marketable trips, all four groups had touring and outdoors as the top main purpose of trip choices. And this, again, bodes really well for continued growth in these segments when we're talking about Route 66 and America 250. Another interesting point that we came across is that boomers were the most likely to travel to a state they had been to before, whether that's because they have more travel experience overall or if they like to return to their tried and true locations is kind of up for interpretation there. But when we're looking at this chart, we do know that boomers are going to be the generation most likely to visit for VFR, and Gen Z is going to be most likely to take a marketable trip, and Gen X is going to be more likely than the other generations to go on a business trip. Gen Z travelers, aka those aged 18 to 28, not me anymore, sad, are just getting their feet wet with making travel decisions on their own, as many are still in college and recently graduated. Again, the top age is 28. So we're thinking, okay, more than half of these are still living at home, in school. So they're really just exploring their what they like when they travel on their own. Um, some key pieces with Gen Z, they are often part of the largest travel parties with an average size of 3.5. They're most likely to travel with friends, so 30%, but they also do still take trips with their parents and their siblings. So they're really getting two different types of trips each year. And then because a lot of their trips are for the first time or with groups they haven't traveled with before, they tend to be budget conscious. They have the longest planning cycle, with nearly half of them planning for 3 months or more as they're getting information from everybody, a lot of places that they haven't visited before. When you're traveling with friends for the first time, a lot of opinions, right? So a longer travel planning cycle there for them. Um, some key characteristics of Gen Z travelers, they tend to be less brand oriented or brand loyal with their accommodations, especially, and 13% use short term rentals. They're really experience driven, but still budget conscious. They're social travelers. Again, they travel with both friends and relatives on a regular basis. They're extremely tech savvy, and especially with information and inspiration phases of the planning funnel. And then they say they are more environmentally aware when they travel. Millennials, where Brian and I fit into this bucket, who are aged 29 to 44. I mean, 25 to 40. No, I'm just kidding. 29 to 44. They tend to be more family oriented in their travel style than some of the other generations. 50% of millennials travel with children, and 66% have kids under 18 in their households. They also have the largest households, with 37% having four or more people living with them. So while the majority of this generation are parents, again, 66%, not all are. So even those who are parents don't always travel with their children. We see that 66% have kids, only 50% travel with their children. So it's important to not put this whole generation into one box. And again, don't forget about those two income, no kids folks either. Hear that a lot from my friends, that dual income, no children. Um, but some key characteristics for millennials: they use more traditional accommodations than VFR or short term rentals, with 54% using hotels or motels while on their trips. Millennials, just like Gen Z, which, I mean, we do tend to have Gen Z children at this point in time, right? Are so it makes sense that there are some similarities there. But millennials are budget conscious and experience driven, just like the younger generation. But they're also in their peak earning and spending years. They're influenced by multi generations when they travel because they are so family focused in their travel style. For Gen X travelers, those aged 45 to 60, they're more balanced travelers. We see them kind of not fitting into a single box. They're really evenly split across a lot of the different variables we've looked at. Um, they do still have a lot of family travel, but some are aging into that empty nester phase of life and travel that way as well. Um, they're not just balanced in ages and their activities, but also their main purpose of trip, where we're not seeing any huge swings between visiting friends and relatives or marketable, while still having a steady share of business travel. So, again, that 9% of business travel. Gen Xers are the most likely to drive to their destination, with three-fourths driving either a rental car or their own vehicle on their trip. Just like millennials, 54% use traditional hotels or motels on their trip. But Gen Xers are even more experience driven than millennials and Gen Z, and less budget conscious on top of that. So I think that's something to try to balance as marketers, right? When we're looking at different generations. However, even though they're less budget conscious, value for money is still top of mind. So, really, the value, not the dollar signs, but how much do you get with your experience or your accommodations? They have aging parents and older children, so couple trips are more popular than family trips compared to other generations that we look at. And then they're also the most established with their careers and their travel style. Finally, we're going to take a deeper dive into the boomers, so age 61 to 79. They're really more routine travelers. I already kind of mentioned it before, that tried and true. They know what they like, they stick with it. And really, that means from their dining to their accommodation types, right? If you like a Texas Roadhouse at home, you're probably going to like a Texas Roadhouse on your vacation. Um, so whether it's dining, shopping accommodations, it's even goes into that vehicle as transportation, right? So 66% drive to their destination. 45% of boomer trips are to visit friends and relatives, and they tend to dine again at more casual and chain restaurants. However, they do still want to explore. They want to go to a destination and see new things, try new things. It just might not be where they sleep or where they eat. So it's really more those activity and experiences where we can kind of get boomers to explore new destinations. So 55% of boomers who shopped spent money at locally owned shops. So again, they want to support local when they can. And then they take longer trips than the other generations. So they're spending more on accommodations and they're staying longer. In fact, a lot longer. Ryan said 3.7 nights away was the average for everyone, but for boomers, it's 4.6 nights away on average. Boomers are time rich, experience seekers who travel frequently with that extra time and have the most disposable income of the four generations we're looking at. One thing that was not lost on Brian and I is that all generations are really looking for new experiences most when they travel. So that is something that goes across all age groups. On the left, just a few demographic pieces here. So on the left, we see that Gen X actually has the highest share of top earners, making over $100,000. While this is true, boomers have more time to travel. So that difference between income and availability is one of those big differentiators between boomers and Gen X. Um, and we are seeing some of those Gen X going into retirement age, and so there are still some similarities there between the two groups. Not surprisingly, when it comes to income, Gen Z is the lowest income bracket. But remember, I'm going to say this again, many are still in high school or college, or have just recently graduated. And statistics have shown too that this generation tends to live at home longer than we've seen in previous generations like millennials and Gen X. So while incomes may be lower, they technically do still have money to spend on travel, and they will. On the right hand side, we'll keep repeating this every year. I know we said it last year, we'll say it again next year, but the traveler population is only going to get more diverse in the next few decades. 46% of Gen Zers are from non white backgrounds, and 25% have a Hispanic background. So when we compare that to boomers who are 88% white, that is a huge shift. And so we really need to make sure that our marketing efforts are representing all of the travelers that we hope to welcome to our destinations. So I'll look into the future. And yes, this is a video clip of Brian and I planning this presentation, looking into our crystal balls. Um, just a few things, what to expect. We've got four main things. So emerging niche activities, my Midwestern accent. Travelers interested in niche activities are growing quickly. They are high intent visitors and they are looking for authentic, experience driven, higher end activities, accommodations, and dining. Younger generations do the most. They're so extra. And I'm just kidding. But really, they do the most activities on trips. So, our Travel USA data shows us that younger generations have been and will continue to participate in the most activities and are likely to spend more time planning their trip. Travel has become a priority for younger generations who are no longer willing to wait until retirement to travel and explore. Growing event-based travel. With large events, anniversaries, America 250 this year, travel for sporting events, live performances, and celebrations are expected to grow. In 2025, 1 in 5 travelers attended a youth, amateur, or pro sporting event, and 1 in 10 attended a live performance. So that's already 10% or more, almost 20% for sports, and we only expect that to grow more in 2026. And then finally, what to expect in 2026 and beyond, more value and budget minded travelers. Again, that K shaped economy, we can't only tailor to the high end visitors. That's only a small portion of the US. What can we do to kind of get to both? And so the highest percentage of people from all generations consider themselves budget friendly travelers who prioritize affordability and value for money. Again, like Brian said, that was 24% of the 23% of the total. And there continues to be a growing gap between high income and lower income households, but all income levels have equal interest in travel as people choose to forego other purchases to prioritize visitation. My last slide, I promise. We're almost done, guys. Thank you so much for hanging with us. But just some action items for you all to take away from this. And really, it's just based on what we've seen in this Travel USA data in our monthly American travel sentiment waves. There are 3 main points of focus for what DMOs can do this year to engage with travelers best and prepare for the future. When it comes to destination management, it'll be more important than ever to focus on experiential travel and value/quality over discounts. DMO should also be working with local stakeholders, attractions, and accommodations to develop traveler type specific messaging, especially as we see the two economies separate further. When it comes to destination marketing, however, travelers are looking for inspiration and information in more and more places. So, using a multi channel approach is super important if you want to reach the right audiences. This isn't just the case for information seeking, but booking as well. You'll need to partner with the more diverse booking platform mix as well, whether that's on your own site or supporting your partners who work with other booking vendors. Help your partners and web design teams with the best practices on how to prepare for AI discovery at each stage of the trip planning cycle, because that just keeps growing and growing. I know right now it's only 10% or so, but we're just going to expect that to continue to increase. And then lastly, we all need to mind the gap. The experience gap. People are still expecting their money to go as far as it did 7, 8 years ago when they travel. And we all know here on this webinar that that's just simply not possible. So we need to find ways to raise the bar where possible, because maintaining the status quo is just not going to be enough for every piece of a trip. So working with your partners on training programs, on customers satisfaction initiatives. But when that's not possible, one way that we can kind of take initiative is to not market to things that we can't deliver on, right? So manage expectations, and that's really going to help you and your stakeholders meet expectations. But I'm going to hand it back over to Brian to kind of talk about some fun things for 2026.
So this will be really quick. I know. Oh, there we go. This will be really quick. I know I've mentioned a few times in here lots of updates to 2025, but I just want to walk through some other things for any of our current subscribers and anyone who might be interested on the call. So let me note for all subscribers with deliveries this year, if we have not been in touch with you, we will be very soon with all the details on these updates that were made to our survey and the updates made to your report that you will be receiving very soon. Additionally, all current subscribers will be able to access their 2025 visitor profile data sometime next month. So we are aiming to give all subscribers access to their visitor profile data in March of this year. Woohoo! I hope you're all cheering and jumping. I saw a few of you dropped off the call, but I hope those of you who stayed are very happy about that. And then last thing, just to note, those volume and expenditure estimates, those will be delivered aligned with whatever was contractually committed as far as the timing goes for those reports. So if we want to go to the next slide for Q&A, that is all that Kelsey and I have for you today. Thank you all again. But please, I don't know, you have anything else?
I can start us off, Brian. Thank
Great.
you both. Very engaging, wonderful information. Appreciate you. So our first question posed today: do we see a difference in the usage of EV between different U.S. regions?
Yes, for sure. And Brian, is it okay if I take this one
Yes.
to kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
regions? So we see that the Midwest and the South are going to be the slowest to really pick up with the EV, but on the coast of the Northeast and the West regions, we're seeing like 16, 17% using electric or hybrid vehicles, compared to some lower numbers in the Midwest and the South.
Wonderful. Thank you. Another question we had is: does marketable going up versus 2024 mean that there were domestic trips in 2025 than international? That there were, I'm assuming more is what they meant, domestic trips in 2025 than international.
So we don't really compare our trip volumes domestically to international, so I can't give an answer on that. But what I will say is preliminary volume estimates that are coming out from the national level. Again, none of this is final, but because we're teasing you all on this call, I will note overall we are seeing things for most places flat year over year as far as volume, trip volume goes. So I wouldn't say that it would be a fair statement to say that in 2025 domestic trips exploded versus 2024. Kelsey, I don't know if you want to add any other context, but that's really the best that we can offer right now. But as we get more information, we're happy to engage and provide those insights to you.
Yeah, I think just one thing to add on there, like we've seen with accommodation data across the board, right? That numbers are down or flat. Unfortunately, we did not see the big boom in domestic trips that we were hoping to make up for those international visitors. There definitely were still a lot of domestic trips taken, like over 1 billion, but it just wasn't enough to kind of eke out the loss in some of the international visitation as a whole for the country.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And thank you, Kelsey and Brian, for sharing. And thank you to everyone who attended our call today. You'll receive links to access this webinar recording in the coming days. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you again, everyone, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.